us. If you would look at Daniel chapter 5, there's so much meat in this one text.
Okay.
And most pastors, when they preach this text, they focus on the handwriting on the wall. But I don't want to focus on that today. I want to focus on Daniel's response to the handwriting on the wall. I want to look at this text. I really want to give our time and attention to how Daniel responds to being summoned by the king, and what particularly he says to the king. I want to look at this text because it is important that we understand all the details of this one story. As I've already told you, most people focus on the handwriting on the wall that was over by the candle stand, or over by the light. In that room that night, the king threw a party. People that I want to focus on in this text is Belshazzar. I want to focus on the queen. I want to focus on Daniel. Then I want to look at Darius the Mede, or Daniel, the king of the Medes and the Persian king. By this time, Nebuchadnezzar is dead. I talked to you last week about God humbles a king. He humbled Nebuchadnezzar because he was arrogant, because he was full of pride. He started feeling himself. And so God decided to humble him. And when God humbled Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar decided to get his stuff together. And finally, he acknowledged that God was who God said he was. God got him to look up, to acknowledge that God was greater than he was. And what God did, he gave Nebuchadnezzar back his sanity, because what God touched was his mind. And God put him out of the kingdom and allowed his kingdom to be the fields where he ate grass and grew hair like a cow, and ate grass like a cow, and grew claws like an eagle. Turn the heat off. I really wanted to look at this particular text because this is different. It's different because it speaks to the fact that God does not give this king a second chance. What God does is different in this text is he takes down a king. He takes him down and he dethrones him. He does not allow him to stay in his position. He does not allow him to keep his authority. He does not allow him to keep his kingdom, because this particular text, I want you to see in this text that it is important for us to understand how important it is. Sometimes God will give you a second chance, but sometimes God will be fed up with you. My brothers and sisters, when God gets fed up with you because you don't learn the lessons of the past, God won't give you a second chance, but he'll take you down. I really need to explain to you, you don't want to get in God's crosshairs. You don't want God to target you because of your arrogance and pride. This story is about Belshazzar. Many scholars believe he is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He is Nebuchadnezzar's daughter's son. And he rules with his father. he is really not the absolute king. He is the co-regent. His father is down in the area of Arabia. He is on a spiritual pilgrimage, and he allows his son to rule in Babylon while he is on his spiritual pilgrimage. And while he is there, he is seeking some kind of spiritual enlightenment, some kind of spiritual engagement, some kind of spiritual awakeness. But in the meantime, his son is in Babylon ruling on the throne, and Belshazzar is sitting there, and he is ruling, filling himself. Really, the historical context of the story is this. While he is in the palace in Babylon, the Medo-Persians, led by Darius, has besieged the city of Babylon. The city of Babylon has been besieged from the east, the west, the north, and the south. But the Babylonians feel pretty confident because in the city of Babylon, they have at least 20 years worth of food. They can survive the besiegement of the Medo-Persians because they got plenty of food. Not only do they have plenty of food, they have plenty of water. Because through the middle of the city, from the outside, the Euphrates River flows through the city of Babylon. But not only that, around the city of Babylon, there's a great wonder. The walls of Babylon, 2 sets of walls surround the city of Babylon. And these cities are tall and they're wide. And nobody has ever been able to overcome the citizens and the armies of Babylon because of these walls. These walls were so wide that 3 or 4 chariots could ride side by side and never bump into each other. And so Belshazzar, he felt confident because he had 20 years worth of food. He had a steady flow of water. And the city was also fortified by 2 sets of walls protecting the city of Babylon. He felt pretty secure because he had plenty of food. He felt pretty secure because he had plenty of water. He felt pretty secure because of the walls that surrounded the city of Babylon. And so he decided, even though the city was besieged by the Medo-Persians led by Darius the king, he felt pretty secure that nobody could conquer the city of Babylon. Nobody could overthrow or besiege the city because they had planned and they had been equipped with everything they need to survive the besieging of the city. They didn't go out to fight, they just stayed put because they had plenty of food, plenty of water, and they had the walls of the city protecting them. But my brothers and sisters, I want to tell you, it don't make any difference how much you got. Stored up, fixed up, saved up. When God decides to take you down, don't make no difference how much food you got, how much water you got, and how tall the walls are around you. God can still take you down. Brothers and sisters, don't put too much confidence in what you got around you, what you got going for you, and think that God can't take you down. It's interesting in this particular text that Belshazzar decided, since he felt pretty confident about the food, the water, and the walls, he decided, since we are being besieged and they can't get to us, they can't destroy us, they can't take us down, he decided, I'm going to throw a party. Now we can go to the text in Daniel chapter 5 because he invited 1,000 people to his party. While the city of Babylon is being besieged by the Medo-Persians led by King Darius in a time of war, in a time of besiegement, he decides to have a party. Enemies on every side. Imagine this fortified city and all of this food and this water from the Euphrates flowing through the city of Babylon, and they feel confident, they are relaxed, they think they got the world under their feet, they think they are untouchable. And so Belshazzar decides, I'm going to throw a party. And so in verse 1, he invites 1,000 of his lords to drink wine and to get drunk himself. He decides we're going to have a good time. Even though the Medo-Persians have surrounded the city on every side. And they felt pretty secure. I need to go ahead and stop a minute and explain to you. Don't feel too secure. Because what is your security can be penetrated by God's hand. God can get beyond what makes you feel secure. He can reach in and he can tear down. Nothing can stop God when God gets on the move. And so the text says he decided he was going to throw a party and invite 1,000 of his friends. But then in verse 2, he done something that got God's attention. He decided that he was going to send somebody to go get the gold and silver vessels that his forefather Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem when he besieged the temple and destroyed Solomon's temple. And he decided he wanted somebody to go get them. And he decided that he was going to drink from them. He was going to use them as wine glasses, as instruments. And he was going to use the things of God in order to really bring attention to his celebration and to really be the climax of his celebration. He had already insulted God by being arrogant. He had already insulted God by thinking that he was great and that he was untouchable. Now he's going to use the holy things of God in his celebration, in his party. All right. And then in verse 4, he going to use the holy things of God, Ebony. But he's going to praise his gods. And boy, if I had time, I'd explain to you about using the holy things of God or the things of God, but then celebrating your gods. And see, he should have, if he was going to use the holy things of God, at least acknowledge the God of those holy things. But the text says he started praising his gods, because gods is literal G-O-D-S. And he started praising his gods. And the text says, in the same hour, a hand showed up. And boy, if I had time, I'd explain to you. You better be very aware and very conscious and very discerning when something unusual happens. When you think you are untouchable and think you're outside of the reach of God. And sometimes you can be having a real good time using the things of God, and you can be having a party thinking you're untouchable because of food and water and because of the fortification of the security you built around the things that you have. You better notice when something unusual happens, because it is unusual when a hand shows up with nobody. It's unusual when a finger starts writing on the plaster of a wall That's very unusual. Because when God communicated to Nebuchadnezzar, he communicated in a dream. And that was usual, something that a king would usually do, a person would usually do. They would have a dream, but now when God decided to take down the king, he done something real unusual. And I really need to explain to you, you better notice the unusual things that happen in your life. Sometimes God can use some unusual things to happen, and literally, Dora, it's things that don't normally happen, strange things that can't be explained. Well, imagine if a hand on that wall started writing, and the hand that started writing and the plaster on that wall had no arm, was attached to no body, that had no head and had no feet. And that hand mysteriously showed up. And that hand, Brother Cannon, mysteriously started writing. And the Bible said that same king, Belshazzar, that was partying and having a good time. Verse 6 says, the king's countenance, it changed. Let me tell you, it made me change too. And really, verse 6 really in the King James Version don't explain exactly what happened. But it was the right reaction to this strange situation. Because the text says his countenance changed from being in a party mood to being terrified that this thing was happening at this particular time. This was a time of celebration when everybody was having a good time. Everybody was boozing it up. The music was loud. The people were in a partying mood, and everybody was having a good time. And then this hand showed up, and the finger on this hand started writing, and it says that the king's mood changed. And his thoughts troubled him. Woo! And his joints became loose. He started trembling with fear. I'm trying to paint a picture. So much fear that his knees started knocking. The strength that he had when he was partying was gone. The strength that he had when he invited his 1,000 lords and his 1,000 officials, his strength was gone. The text says his knees started knocking against each other. The king cried, bring me the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king wanted his astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers to come in. And he says, whoever can tell me the interpretations of these writings shall be clothed with purple and with a gold chain around his neck, and shall be third ruler in the kingdom. I need to explain to you, his father was king, he was co-regent, so he was second, his father was first, and he was going to make this person third. And now the wise men of the king could not read the writings and could not make known to the king the interpretations. And then the king was greatly troubled. His countenance changed, and the lords were astonished. Now, let me tell you, this is humiliation, because it looks like the strong man is now a fearful man. the strong man is now a trembling man. And I love that the text says the lords were astonished, because when they got invited to this party, they saw a strong man, a powerful man, a confident man, but now they see a trembling man. My brothers and sisters, when God gets ready to deal with you or take you down, it'll be a process, and he'll make a strong man be a weak man, a confident man be a trembling man. God will bring a strong man and make him weak in the presence of people who he tried to brag in front of. You better be careful, because God will make you look weak when you try to make yourself look strong. Especially when you try to be a show out. And now the very Lord that he tried to impress, now they see him scared, trembling with his knees are knocking. Verse 10, I need to explain this to you. The queen mother. You better be glad that God put some people in your life and keep some people in your life, because you're going to need them sooner or later. The queen came and said to the king, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you or your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom. In whom the Spirit of the Holy God, and he was the same man that gave your father some insight in desperate and dark times. I'm just trying to give you the modern vernacular. He said he helped Daddy when Daddy had the same problem. Daddy had a dream, you got some writing on the wall. And this same man helped Daddy in his darkness, in his time of despair, in his time of confusion, when he needed some direction, when he needed light in a dark time. This man helped Daddy. She said in verse 12, inasmuch he has an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreters of dreams, riddles, and can explain indentations, all of these enigmas, all of these writings, all of this can be found in Daniel. The king called him Belshazzar. Belshazzar. So let me call him so that he can interpret the writing on the wall. Now I'm going to get to the meat of the sermon. Because starting in verse 13, Daniel is brought before King Belshazzar. And what Daniel does is explain to him the writing on the wall. But what I love in the text, before he explains it to him, Daniel states his position. Daniel speaks to his integrity. Daniel says, I can't be bought, and it ain't no price for my gift. I'm going somewhere. I'm finna blow up the prosperity gospel. I'm finna to take down Benny Hinn, T.D. Jakes, Oral Roberts, Juanita Bynum. All of these people say who teach you and tell you that if you give them something, they'll give you something. They will tell you what you need to hear. They will be the emissary, the mediator between you and God, and they'll do it for a price if you sow a seed. Daniel was brought before the king. And the king said to Daniel, you are that Daniel, one of the captives of Judah, who my father brought from Judah. And I heard that there's an excellent spirit, or the Spirit of God in you, that you got understanding and excellent wisdom is found in you. He says, I've checked with my group, and none of my group could do nothing. And boy, I need to explain. If I can I stick a pin right here? There's some folk or guy that you got around you that really don't bring no value to your life. Every time you need them and you try to tap into what they can bring into your life, they bring nothing. Because this is not only a time when he needed them to interpret the writing on the wall, they couldn't do nothing. They couldn't read it, they couldn't interpret it. And so they really didn't have any value. And when I said to somebody this week in coaching them, I explained to them, you need to determine that if people in your life do not bring any qualitative value, you probably need to go ahead and dismiss them. If you don't see where they bring value to your life, value that adds understanding, value that encourages, value that instructs, they probably need to be dismissed. Every time you need them in dark, desperate, and despairing times, they come up empty. And then the text says, he says to Daniel in verse 16, if you can read and interpret these writings, I'll clothe you with some purple clothes and put a gold chain around your neck and make you third in the kingdom. And Daniel said, let your gifts be for yourself. Give your rewards to another. And he says, I'm going to interpret the writing on the wall. I'm going to tell you what it means. And I don't want nothing for it. You can keep your purple clothes. You can keep your gold. And you don't have to exalt me to any position. I wish I had time to explain to you, my brothers and my sisters, you better be careful with these seed-sowing prophets, apostles, and these prophetesses that tell you that if you sow, God will bring prosperity, peace, wealth, and health into your life. The example of Daniel saying, I'm going to give it to you, but you ain't got to give me anything. Because the truth of God is not for sale. It's not a commodity that can be traded for money, for a position, or for power. Daniel said you can give it to another, but I'll read the writings and I'll make this interpretation to you. And I love, because I'm almost finished, he decides to preach a sermon before he interprets the writing. And boy, if I had time, I'd explain to you that one of the things he did in trying to explain to him this sermon, or through this sermon that he preaches before he interprets the writings on the wall that were written by the finger on the hand, he explains to him a story that he should be familiar with. And so what he does, he goes back into the past to explain to him that he should have learned from the past, and he should have learned from the story of his grandfather, how God dealt with his grandfather. He really wanted to explain to him, you should have learned by what you knew. You should have learned by what you've been told. And that's really a problem most people have. You don't learn. You don't learn how God deals with other folk and how God handles other situations. Maybe your day is not today. You better look at what God done in the past to know what God is going to do in the future, because God took some folk down in the future and you're in the present. And if you don't learn that God always has his way and you're on God's timeline, and when God gets ready to take you out, he will take you out. And he really says to Belshazzar, you haven't learned the lesson of your grandfather, because when he decided he was going to try to show God that he was greater than God, God took him down. He said you should have learned from your grandfather. Because he says in verse 18, God gave your grandfather a kingdom, majesty, glory, and honor. He gave it to him in front of all people, all nations, and all language. But this fella started feeling himself in verse 20. But his heart got lifted up. His spirit was hardened with pride. And he thought that he got himself where he was. And he took the glory from God and gave it to himself. But God brought him down. And he says, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of men and appoints whoever he chooses over it. You know, what I want to tell you, you better learn from the lessons of the past. Because how God has handled something is how God will continue to handle something. And see, we don't like to learn the lessons of the past. I'm scared. Whenever somebody my age die, I'm fear and trembling comes over me. Because what God does to other folk, he can do it to me. And sometimes you need to learn the lessons of the past so you can live in the present, so you can humble yourself. Don't ever think that God will bypass dealing with you when you don't learn the lessons of the past. But he says in verse 22, but you, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart. Although you knew all of this.
That's right.
Well, I be scared when I see God taking somebody down or taking somebody out. The natural response is to figure out what you can do not to get in God's crosshairs. When you see God dealing, judging, taking somebody else out, it ought to make you want to straighten up and evaluate your own life. When you see somebody troubling God's heart and causing God's hand to move, the natural thing is to say, wait a minute, I'm walking in that same way. I'm doing some of that same stuff. I think I better quit. But most of us won't quit. We'll keep on going. And he says, you have lifted yourself against the Lord of heaven. And you brought these vessels of the house of God before you, in front of you and your lords, your wives, your concubines, and you have drunk from them. And you are praising the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And he says, listen, and now let me tell you what this writing means. I really need to explain to you, my brothers and sisters, God will send you a warning before he ever sends judgment. He will send you a warning before he ever starts taking you down. And sometimes the warning, Sister Matthew, is what he does in the life of other people. How he moves in the life of other people. How he takes down other people. How he deals with other people. You better learn the ways of God. And what Daniel was saying to Belshazzar, you have not learned the ways of God. Since you haven't, God decided he's going to deal with you. And that's why he sent the hand. And that's why the finger started writing. And boy, I need to go ahead and explain to you that this mail was delivered to the right address. I mean, sometimes when you see the handwriting, the letter God sends, and I really wanted to entitle this message, Getting an Email or a Text Message or an Instant Message from God. Because God got the right address. He got the right person. he targets it specifically to Belshazzar and his kingdom and his party on his wall by the light, because he wants him to understand this message is for you. Don't point to anybody else, because the only person whose countenance has changed, who is trembling in fear, is the person to whom the message is for. And he says, Mede, Tekra, usurper. God got 3 messages for you. This is the interpretation of each word. Verse 26, the first word, God has numbered your kingdom. It's finished. Now I'm going to see how God works. I love teaching the Bible. Because with Nebuchadnezzar, he allowed his kingdom to stand, but he took him down. Because God allowed Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom to remain, because he was going to restore his kingdom. He cut the tree, but he left the stump in the root, because he was going to restore the kingdom. But in this judgment, he says your kingdom is finished. Everything you think you have built, everything you're bragging about, everything you have confidence in, the food you got, the water that's flowing through the Euphrates, flowing through the middle of the city, the walls, it's finished. Boy, you better be careful, because God will start messing with your stuff. He said, your kingdom is finished. I tell you, God took him down by destroying his kingdom. I need to get out the exit for a minute and explain to you exactly how Darius the king, the Medo-Persian king, was able to conquer the Babylonians. This is what we're told by Herodian the historian. How he was able to besiege the city and how he was able to enter the city was he figured out how to get in the city with an ingenious plan. I already told you that the Euphrates River flowed from outside the city, went under the wall of the city, provided water for the city. And what Darius and his armies did, they literally went down and built a dam. And they routed the water into a marsh or into a wetland. Because the Euphrates River was a deep river. And as long as the water was high, they could not get into the city by way of the Euphrates River. And so Darius the king and his army decided to dam up the Euphrates and send the water in another direction. And the water table of the city failed. And Darius and his army was able to go into the city through the waters of the Euphrates River. And they were able to go under the walls because they literally routed the water in another direction. And while Belshazzar was in his palace having a good time, they didn't realize that the water had stopped flowing. And the water table had gone down because they were so distracted by having a good time. And Belshazzar was trembling in fear, and his countenance had fallen. Had taken time to notice that the water table of the Euphrates that flowed through the city was now dropping. And the Euphrates was drying up. And that's how Darius and the Persians and the Medes got into the city. They went under the walls in the river and besieged the city. because they wasn't ready to fight. They were having a good time. They wasn't thinking about war. They was thinking about a fast. Belshazzar wasn't thinking about his enemies. He was thinking about his own fear. God will sometimes get into your stuff, get into your life, get into your circumstances through what you think is a security. He will use that in order to take you down. The second thing he says, you have been weighed in the balance and been found wanting. And I really need to explain this to you. He says, first of all, you're finished. And secondly, you're not of any substance. He says, when I really look at you, it ain't much to you. You look strong. You look like you're a king. You got the position of a king. But when I put you on the scales, your sins outweigh your substance. You really ain't much. You look like you're much to the public, but to me, you ain't much. You've been weighed in the balance, and that's a scale where what God requires and what Belshazzar was put on the scale, and listen, what he was didn't measure up to what God wanted him to be. And so God had to take him down. It's a whole lot of folk who look like they substance, but they ain't substance. They just an empty shell with no content. It ain't much to them. And God, when he puts them on the scale of his righteousness and his holiness and what he requires, they are not. He says, you've been found wanting. It's a whole lot of folk that look successful. They are successful. And by society's scales, they are the stuff. But I'm glad that I can be measured based on God and God's word, God's righteousness, God's requirements. And I really need to stop parenthetically and explain to you, you're going to be shocked who's in heaven. And not only are you going to be shocked who's in heaven, you're going to be shocked who actually gets rewarded and who don't get rewarded. Some folk going to make it because they know Jesus and they believe in Jesus. But when their works are cast into the fire, it's going to be haywood and stubble and not gold, silver, and precious stone. In other words, they look big and grand on earth. They had television ministries, had nice luxury cars, lived in mansions, drove jets all around the world. But when God puts them on the scale, they lack. He says, you don't weigh that much. And it ain't much to you when you break it all down. And then the third thing, and I'm going to close. And he says, your kingdom has been divided. Well, listen, let me tell you something. And I love that Daniel is speaking for God, and he's speaking in present tense, not in future tense. Because that very night, while he was listening to Daniel, while his lords were astonished that he was a fearful man who was once a confident man, in that very moment, the Medo-Persians, led by Darius, was coming into the city by the way of the Euphrates River. God has divided your kingdom and given it to the Medes and the Persians. And what Daniel didn't want, he got in verse 29. Because what you don't try to bargain to give people what they need, God will give it to you at the hands of your enemies. Be not dismayed, whatever betide. God will give it to you. Not by tricks, not by manipulation, not by trying to tell people that they need to give, that they ought to give, that they obligated to give. God will take care of you when you are faithful to him, when you do what is right, when people try to make you do what is wrong, just do right. Belteshazzar in verse 29 commanded that Daniel receive those purple clothes and put a gold chain around his neck and proclaim him third ruler in the kingdom. And I'm closing in verse number 30. Boy, this is good stuff here. Because see, Nebuchadnezzar, his takedown was gradual. 7 years he had to suffer. But sometimes God don't wait 7 years. God ain't gonna delay his response because he says your kingdom has been divided. And look at what the text says. That very night, while Daniel was talking, the Medes and the Persians were coming under the walls by the way of the Euphrates, seizing the city of Babylon. And that night, all three prophecies came to pass. Usually it's gradual. God do the first one, then he do the second one. And then later on he do the third one. But in this text, all three happen on the same. First of all, you finished. And your kingdom is that happened that night. He says you're not of any substance. And because you're not of any substance, I'm taking you down tonight. And then he says your kingdom is divided. And that night the Medo-Persians snuck under the walls of the cities by the way of the Euphrates River. Because I'm trying to explain to you, don't keep taking chance after chance. Don't keep thinking because God don't get you today that he ain't gonna get you. Don't ignore the signs of God taking down other people as a sign that he's not going to take you down. You're not better than them. If they do what they do and God don't let them get away with it, he ain't going to let you get away with it. I feel like preaching. Because justice delayed ain't justice denied. And in God's timeline, he'll show up when you having a good time. When you think you got it all together. When you think you can't be conquered or taken down. God can decide to disrupt your success. He can decide to take you down when you feel most secure. When you feel like you won and you are untouchable. God can decide to take you down. But since I know that, I'm going to humble myself. And I'm going to acknowledge the God of heaven. I sure feel like preaching. Because God will take care of you. If you acknowledge the God of heaven. Everything that happened to me that was good, God did it. You got to give God the praise and give God all the credit. God did it. And I tell the world that God did it. I sure feel like preaching this morning because when I look around and I think things over and I look at what I got and what I have, God gave it. If I got up this morning, that was God. Drove down the highway, that's God. When I woke up this morning with a reasonable portion of health and strength,